I know that there are other ways for me to watch the post-sequel era of SpongeBob episodes, but for me, I really just couldn't get into them, considering that I've only watched a few, and considering that I've tried to watch a new episode that instantly turned me off. It really sums up onto everything onto why I'm reviewing this episode, considering the fact that it's basically using this famous line and just turning it into an 11-minute episode, which isn't as bad as I thought it was after watching it for preparation of this review, but at the same time, there is still no excuse for this episode's existence. The episode starts with a mini montage of Fred, who is the background character who said, "My leg," after being in pain, repeatedly says, "my leg," so many times, in the span of like less than 5 seconds every time he says that line again and again. And the reason is that he always gets into trouble while his leg just instantly gets damaged by anything around him. The doctor told him that if he doesn't prevent his leg from getting any more hurt, he will instantly lose his leg and have to use a robotic leg, which apparently the robot in this episode actually has some kind of a role in this by begging Fred to not break his leg so that he doesn't use his leg. I would consider this a way just to make this episode somewhat entertaining, but at the same time, it honestly, it just shows desperation. This episode is basically desperation. I mean, with the post-movie era, there was no desperation, but for here, it just shows that this post-sequel era is full of desperation for all fans to watch this show again. SpongeBob, who is friends with Fred for some reason, I don't know, maybe they have to find a way to have SpongeBob have a purpose in this, decides to make sure that Fred doesn't use his legs, so he just completely goes to where he's walking, which he completely pushes logs through the shredder with his legs. And SpongeBob tried to make sure that Fred doesn't use his legs, so he decides to completely use a leg stool that was something that can hold up the logs while being shredded, which ends up destroying the entire building that Fred was walking in. And for the majority of this episode, SpongeBob prevents Fred from getting any sort of danger. And this is just an excuse of having the character saying "my leg" or the word "leg" or "my butt" or "my skull" or something, or torso, just to pad out the episode's runtime. And to be quite honest, that's just basically what this episode is. And in my opinion, I don't consider this as fan fiction because I don't think that this plot is really that bad, but at the same time, it's more of fan animation than from an episode made by professional animators. Yeah, if you never expected me to say something like that and you thought I was about to say fanfiction, well, here's the thing. When it comes to a terrible episode from a cartoon that is so bad with poorly constructed script, that is considered a fanfiction made by a fan. But whenever I look at this, the plot isn't as bad, but just how it's executed with the characters just completely repeating saying "my leg" constantly for the sake of just making that famous quote really infamous in this, then I really think that this is considered fan animation. And I never thought I would say that from a SpongeBob episode during the post-sequel era. Look, I'm just gonna point this out right now that the whole "my leg" joke was funny when we were young, but looking at it right now, I honestly think that having an episode dedicated to it is just full of randomness, and for the sake of just having a new generation of SpongeBob fans get the knowledge of what the "my leg" joke is all about. However, in the pre-movie era, they did this joke once in a while, and they only said it once or twice in one episode, and the other times, was probably voiced by a different voice actor, who isn't the same voice actor that Fred is being portrayed. The thing is, if you completely made a show that has one of the most famous quotes from the 1990s or 2000s, and you make an episode completely dedicated about it, you can really tell that it's not going to end up really well. I mean, for this episode's credit, it didn't make the my leg joke really redundant, and I can say that this is a lot more better than the Teen Titans Go episode Waffles. But at the same time, this entire episode honestly feels like a way just to have Fred to have some kind of a purpose, even though that he was, for the majority of the Spongebob episodes, even in the post-movie era, as a background character. He was the reason onto why he keeps getting his leg cut is because he wants to do it intentionally. Whether he doesn't do it intentionally, it doesn't work. This episode shows that the times that SpongeBob tries to have Fred's leg to be broken, it ends up backfiring. However, when Fred's not paying attention to his surroundings, his leg gets instantly hurt and completely gets back to the hospital. He wants to go back to the hospital because he's in love with one of the nurses in the hospital, which I have to admit, people who go to a nurse and meet a hot person and have an excuse to get themselves hurt and go back to the hospital is understandable, but at the same time, you don't have to break your body in order to get back to the hospital. You could have just go to the hospital and then talk to the nurse and probably go hang out with them by the park or in the park or something. So there's really no point to having Fred repeatedly attempting to have his leg being broken, despite the fact that it ends up backfiring constantly. For me, it just makes this episode more like a fan animation project from some fan of the show instead of an episode from the animators. And I don't consider this as a terrible criticism, because at the same time, I wanted to actually enjoy this episode, but at the same time, it just doesn't usually work for how they just hammer in the my leg joke. Granted, they didn't kill the joke, considering the fact that this episode is centered around it, and if this episode was actually longer than 11 minutes, then I can say that it would instantly kill the my leg joke in the second half of this episode. So anyway, when Fred managed to get back to the hospital by having his entire body broken because Spongebob says my leg, and then the hospital people completely take SpongeBob into the ambulance, which also causes them to run over Fred's face and torso. Yeah, that's how Fred got into the hospital. At this point, it's just basically get your entire body damaged, except your leg, and you can instantly go back to the hospital, which it's the same plot that I've seen from this show from the pre-movie era, where Squidward wanted to get SpongeBob's odd talents in the second half, while in the first half, he didn't want it to, and he wanted SpongeBob to start from scratch. Anyway, in the hospital, we get to see the nurse that Fred is in love with, and he's just basically a stronger and muscular woman named Nurse Bazooka, who is voiced by a male. You know, I can understand that there are some times that the romantic relationships can be for comedy purposes, but at the same time, it really makes this episode a lot more predictable and way more than a fan animation episode that I think that the fan just took a request from some desperate fan to make it an episode like this, and then their dream has come true. That just pretty much makes me dig deeper into what I think about this episode in general. As for the song of My Leg Is in Love, it's just there just to have this episode have some kind of ending, since that Nurse Bazooka actually liked Fred's song. And in all honesty, I really don't think I can actually come up with a way of how this episode is more of a fan animation project from a fan instead of an episode from professional artists. You know, every time this episode easily gets into my head of how people actually enjoy this episode, just raises more questions on the fact that the post-sequel era is considered tolerable by some fans. I mean, I can agree that it's the second best when it comes to the 3 eras of SpongeBob, but just by watching this episode, I just don't have an opinion or an expression of what I actually find enjoyable from this episode. When I first watched this episode, some of the gags involving the my leg joke actually made me laugh, but after rewatching it again, I cannot even try to enjoy myself like I did for my first viewing, because of how much this show just tries to be relevant to Nickelodeon fans, but at the same time, Nickelodeon is just doing this for the sake of just trying to have some kind of relevance like every other company, which is pretty much the sad truth. SpongeBob, at this point, has 3 movies. Camp Cola is still being made to actually premiere sometime of this year, and the fact that we'll have to deal with the fact that this show is still continuing on, even though that there's a spin-off is being made in production at the moment. Subscribers, this is the reason onto why people like me have been giving up the show and just move on to different shows. I can understand that some people want this show to go on forever, but at the same time, this show has been going on for almost 22 years, and at this point, I honestly think that its purpose just sums up everything that Nickelodeon doesn't have any other ways to save themselves. If this show never existed when it debuted in 1999, then I honestly think that Nickelodeon will probably not be a $1 million or $1 billion company thanks to SpongeBob, which is just basically the sad truth. Episodes like this really sums up onto the fact that they had to come up episode gimmicks by completely taking an idea by a line from the original era and just completely extend it to 11 minutes, which isn't as bad as extending it to 22 minutes, but at the same time, it doesn't make this episode entertaining for me. It just makes it really fleshed out for one of the wrong reasons. And that fleshing out is just desperation. I will admit that this episode isn't as bad as what many ex-SpongeBob fans thought, but at the same time, it doesn't even consider a really great episode compared to the pre-movie era. Whether if you agree with me or not, I honestly think that this episode's existence didn't need to happen. In fact, it just really shows how much this show will still go on until it actually has some kind of ending. But at the same time, SpongeBob doesn't really need an ending, since that it's mostly a comedy cartoon instead of a serious cartoon like Steven Universe in the Owl House, which I'm gonna get to that cartoon tomorrow. Anyway, I give this episode a 5.75 out of 10.